At 4 in the morning on March 3rd, 2026, a fishing boat out of Chimbote, Peru, pulled up its third net of the night. Empty. Not nearly empty, not disappointing, empty. The captain had been fishing these waters for 22 years. He knew what an empty net meant. He turned the boat around. He did not need to check the sea surface temperature data to know what the instruments in Lima were already confirming. The anchovies were gone. And when the anchovies leave the coast of Peru, what follows them is not just a fishing story. What follows them is a food crisis, an insurance crisis, a disease crisis, and an ecological collapse across 4 continents, 18 months later. And nobody is connecting the dots. Before we go any further, if this channel shows you what the data actually says beneath the weather maps and the drought graphics and the flooded village footage, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. Now, here is the version of El Niño the news gives you every time. A map of the world, arrows. Some places get more rain, some places get less. California floods, Australia droughts. The graphic is clean. The graphic is true. The graphic is almost completely useless for understanding what El Niño actually does to 8 billion people. Here is what the news does not give you. In the 18 months following the onset of a major El Niño event, a cascade of consequences spreads through systems that have nothing obvious to do with Pacific Ocean temperatures. Food prices move, insurance markets fracture, disease vectors shift into latitudes they have not occupied in recorded history. Coral reefs, the nursery habitat for a quarter of all marine species, bleach and die across ocean basins simultaneously. These consequences are not secret. They are documented in peer-reviewed literature, in commodity market data, in insurance industry filings, and World Health Organization outbreak reports. They are just not connected. Tonight, we connect them. Because in May 2026, the Pacific Ocean is doing something the models have been tracking for 6 months. The El Niño index, sitting at negative 0.55 as recently as late 2025 deep in La Niña territory, has climbed. Through negative 0.37, through negative 0.15, into positive territory, currently sitting at plus 0.11 and climbing. NOAA has an El Niño watch in effect. The next El Niño is not coming, it is already developing. And the ocean it is developing in is not the ocean that produced the last one. That is the thing they are hiding from you, not by design, not as conspiracy, by omission, by weather map thinking applied to a problem that is not a weather problem. It is a systems problem, and the systems are already moving. Most people understand El Niño as a weather pattern. That understanding is approximately as useful as understanding a car engine as the thing that makes the wheels turn. Technically accurate, completely insufficient. El Niño is the visible surface expression of a planetary scale reorganization of how the tropical Pacific Ocean and the atmosphere above it exchange heat, moisture, and energy. In a normal year, what oceanographers call La Niña or neutral conditions, the trade winds blow westward across the tropical Pacific. They push warm surface water toward Australia and Indonesia. They pile it up. The western Pacific becomes a vast reservoir of warm water, 1 to 2 meters higher than the eastern Pacific. Cold, nutrient-rich water wells up along the South American coast, feeding one of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth. Then something shifts. The trade winds weaken. Sometimes they reverse. The warm water that was piled up in the west sloshes back east. A mass of warm water, sometimes covering an area larger than the continental United States, spreads across the central and eastern Pacific. Sea surface temperatures in that region rise by 1, 2, sometimes 3 degrees Celsius above their normal baseline. That temperature anomaly reorganizes everything. The storm track moves, the monsoon shifts. The rainfall patterns across South America, Africa, Asia, Australia rearrange themselves according to where the heat is. The Walker circulation, the planetary scale convective loop that connects the tropics, breaks down and rebuilds in a different configuration. El Niño is not a weather event. It is a planetary scale heat redistribution. And the consequences of that redistribution are not limited to which countries get flooded and which get drought. They are written in empty fishing nets, in cocoa futures markets, in hospital admission records in East Africa, in insurance company quarterly filings. They are written in the bleached white skeletons of coral reefs across 3 ocean basins, and they are building again, right now. Hold this number, 97%. In April 2025, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, together with the International Coral Reef Initiative, confirmed the formal end of the 4th global coral bleaching event, the most extensive mass bleaching in recorded history. The event began in early 2023. It accelerated through the 2023-24 El Niño, one of the 5 strongest El Niño events in the instrumental record, peaking at a Niño 3.4 index anomaly of approximately 2.0 degrees Celsius above baseline. It spread across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans simultaneously. 97% of the world's coral reefs experienced heat stress conditions sufficient to cause bleaching during the event. 54 countries affected. Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor. They support approximately 25% of all marine species. Roughly 1 billion people depend on reef fisheries for food or income. When coral bleaches, when the heat drives the symbiotic algae out of the coral tissue, turning it white, it does not die immediately. It is stressed. If temperatures return to normal quickly enough, it can recover. But when temperatures remain elevated for weeks and months, as they did during the 2023-24 El Niño on top of the warmest ocean baseline in recorded history, the coral starves. It dies. What remains is calcium carbonate skeleton, white, beautiful from a distance, ecologically dead. The Great Barrier Reef experienced its worst mass bleaching ever recorded during the 2023-24 event. Australia's Institute of Marine Science documented bleaching across 73% of surveyed reef areas. The Florida Keys experienced their worst bleaching event ever recorded in the summer of 2023, with water temperatures reaching 38 degrees Celsius in some shallow areas, temperatures more consistent with a warm bath than an ocean. The news covered some of this, not enough, and critically, the news did not explain what a dead reef means 5 years later, 10 years later. A bleached and dying reef does not recover on a human timescale. The coral that died in 2024 will not be back in 2026 or 2030, or possibly 2040. The fish species that depended on that reef structure for breeding habitat are already under pressure. The fishing communities that depended on those fish species are already adapting, or failing to adapt. And the 2026 El Niño is developing on an ocean that just spent 2 years cooking the reefs. Go back to the fishing captain off Chimbote. His empty net is not just his problem. The Peruvian anchoveta and growlus ringens is the single most heavily harvested fish species on the planet by weight. In a normal year, Peru's anchovy catch exceeds 5 million tons. In the peak years, it approaches 8 million on the planet by weight. In a normal year, Peru's anchovy catch exceeds 5 million tons. In the peak years, it approaches 8 million. Those anchovies do not end up on dinner plates in Lima. 90% of the catch is processed into fish meal and fish oil. Fish meal is the primary protein ingredient in aquaculture feed, the food that grows the farmed salmon in Norwegian fjords, and the tilapia in Chinese fish farms, and the shrimp in Thai processing facilities that ends up on your supermarket shelf. Fish oil is the primary source of omega-3 fatty acids in commercial aquaculture. It is also used in dietary supplements consumed by hundreds of millions of people globally. When El Niño suppresses the cold water upwelling off Peru, the anchovies disappear. The fish meal supply contracts, the price spikes. In 2023, as the El Niño was building, Peruvian anchovy catch fell to approximately 2.4 million tons, less than half the normal level. Fish meal prices reached records not seen in decades. That price signal transmitted through the global food system over the following 12 to 18 months. Farmed salmon became more expensive. Farmed shrimp became more expensive. Chicken became more expensive, because fish meal is also used in poultry feed. Eggs became more expensive. The transmission is not instant. It is lagged. It moves through supply chains and contracts and seasonal production cycles. By the time a Peruvian anchovy shortage shows up in the price of a supermarket rotisserie chicken in Manchester or Toronto, no journalist connects those two data points. The anchovy story ran 14 months ago. The chicken price story runs today. The link is invisible, but it is real and documented. And the 2026 El Niño is developing precisely as Peruvian anchovy stocks were beginning to recover from the 2023-24 event. The captain's empty net in March 2026 is not just his story, it is yours. In the town of Coixco, 5 kilometers north of Chimbote, there's a processing plant that has been converting anchovies into fish meal since 1974. In January 2024, it suspended operations, not temporarily. The owner, a family that has run the plant for 3 generations, signed the suspension notice and told his 340 employees to file for government assistance. He told a Peruvian journalist, "The sea is warm and the anchovies went somewhere else. This is not the first time." But this time, we had not recovered from the last time before the next time started. 3 generations of fishing, 1 sentence. That sentence is the consequence the weather map does not show. The somewhere else the anchovies went is deeper water, colder water, further south, out of reach of the boats, out of reach of the nets, out of reach of the processing plant that 340 families depended on, out of reach of the fish meal supply chain that 8 billion people are downstream of. Here is the consequence that has received almost no public attention. The global property insurance market is breaking, not in a single dramatic collapse, in a slow withdrawal, a managed retreat, insurers quietly declining to renew policies in high-risk zones, quietly raising premiums beyond what households can absorb, quietly calculating that the risk models they built their business on no longer reflect the world they are operating in. El Niño is a primary driver of this fracture. Here is the mechanism. Insurance pricing is based on historical loss data. If a region has experienced major flood losses roughly once every 20 years, the insurer prices the policy to be profitable across a 20-year cycle. The model assumes the past is a reliable guide to the future. El Niño events make that assumption false, because El Niño conditions dramatically elevate the probability of extreme weather events in specific regions, and that elevation is not uniformly distributed across years. It is concentrated in El Niño years, which means the loss distribution is it is clustered. Every 3 to 7 years, the losses in multiple regions simultaneously spike in the same 12-month window. The 2023-24 El Niño produced insured losses from climate-related events that Swiss Re estimated at approximately $108 billion globally, a record for a single year at the time. That number landed on insurance company balance sheets simultaneously. Multiple regions, multiple perils, all elevated by the same planetary scale heat redistribution. In Australia, 2 insurers announced they were restricting coverage in Queensland after a series of El Niño-linked flood events in the preceding years. In California, State Farm and Allstate announced they were no longer writing new home insurance policies, in part because wildfire risk, which El Niño modulates through its effect on precipitation and drought patterns, had become unmodelable using historical data. The industry term for what is happening is the protection gap, the growing divide between the losses that occur from climate-related events and the fraction of those losses that are actually insured. In the United States, the protection gap for flood damage already exceeds 90%, meaning that for every dollar of flood damage that occurs, less than 10 cents is covered by insurance. When El Niño drives an above-average flood or drought season, the affected families and municipalities and businesses carry the loss directly, not the insurer, the families. And as insurers withdraw from risk zones, the protection gap widens. Each El Niño event leaves more people exposed than the last. That is what the weather map does not show. There is a third cascade that the El Niño coverage almost never mentions. Infectious disease, malaria, dengue fever, cholera, and Rift Valley fever are not randomly distributed across the globe. They are distributed according to temperature and precipitation patterns. Mosquito vectors that carry malaria and dengue reproduce in warm, standing water. Cholera propagates in conditions of flooding and contaminated water supply. Rift Valley fever explodes in livestock populations following heavy rainfall in East Africa. El Niño reorganizes all of those conditions simultaneously. During and following the 2023-24 El Niño, the WHO and PAHO tracked the following. Dengue cases globally reached a record 13 million reported cases in 2024, the highest ever recorded. The Americas experienced the worst dengue outbreak in the region's history, with Brazil alone recording over 4 million cases in the first half of the year. East Africa, where El Niño drives anomalous rainfall, experienced flooding that created massive standing water areas across Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Malaria transmissions spiked in highland regions where altitude had previously provided a temperature buffer. The mosquito vectors followed the warmth upward. Cholera outbreaks followed flooding in multiple countries simultaneously. The WHO's Global Cholera Dashboard for 2024 recorded outbreaks in 44 countries, the highest number since systematic reporting began. These outbreaks are not random. They are predictable. El Niño's effects on precipitation and temperature are predictable enough that public health researchers can generate probabilistic forecasts of disease burden 6 months in advance. Those forecasts exist. They are published. They are used by some well-resourced health ministries. They are largely unknown to the public in the countries that have the resources to understand them. And the 2026 El Niño is developing while health systems in the most vulnerable countries are still recovering from the 2024 outbreak burden. Hold that. But the fishing collapse and the insurance fracture and the disease burden, as real and as severe as they are not the most hidden consequence of El Niño, not the thing they are most completely failing to explain to you. The most hidden consequence is about the ocean itself, about what is different between every El Niño that came before 2015 and every El Niño that has come since, about the baseline, about what happens when a planetary scale heat redistribution event, an event that has been occurring roughly every 3 to 7 years for at least the past 10,000 years, begins occurring in an ocean that is categorically warmer than the ocean it has always operated in. Because the El Niño mechanism is the same, but the ocean it is running on is not. Every El Niño event in recorded history has been measured as an anomaly, a deviation above normal. The Niño 3.4 index, the standard measure of El Niño intensity, measures sea surface temperature in a defined region of the Central Pacific and compares it to a 30-year baseline average. when the anomaly exceeds 0.5 degrees Celsius for 5 consecutive 3-month periods. El Niño is officially declared. Here's the problem nobody's explaining. The baseline itself has been moving. The 30-year baseline used to calculate El Niño anomalies was updated most recently to reflect the period 1991 to 2020. That 30-year average is warmer than the previous baseline, which is warmer than the baseline before that. The ocean is warming. The baseline is chasing it upward. An El Niño that produces a 1.5 degree anomaly above the current baseline is not the same event as an El Niño that produced a 1.5 degree anomaly above the 1960-1990 baseline. Because the absolute temperature is higher, a 1.5 degree anomaly above a baseline that is already 0.9 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial average produces absolute ocean temperatures that the coral reefs, the fish populations, the marine food webs, and the atmospheric circulation patterns have never experienced. The El Niño anomaly is the same size. The consequences are larger, because the consequences are driven not by the anomaly alone, but by the absolute temperature. The bleaching threshold for coral is an absolute temperature, approximately 1.1 degree above the local maximum monthly mean. It does not care about anomalies. It cares about degrees Celsius. When the baseline rises, the El Niño event does not need to be as strong to push temperatures above that bleaching threshold. The 2023-24 El Niño was strong, but it bleached 97% of the world's reefs, not only because it was strong, but because it was strong on top of the warmest ocean baseline in recorded history. The 2026 El Niño is developing. The ocean it is developing on is, as of April 2026, still showing anomalously warm sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean and the tropical Atlantic. The warmth from the 2023-24 event has not fully dissipated. The system is not recovering between events the way it used to. The baseline is higher than it was in 2023, and the new El Niño is building on top of it. I want to go to the instruments, 3 of them, right now. May 2026. The first is the TAO Triton Array. The Tropical Atmosphere Ocean Array is a network of moored buoys across the tropical Pacific. Roughly 70 instruments spread across the equatorial ocean, measuring sea surface and subsurface temperatures, wind speed, and ocean currents in real time. The TAO array data for May 2026 shows subsurface warming, a warm anomaly building below the surface in the central and eastern Pacific. This subsurface warm pool is the precursor signal. It takes months to reach the surface, but it is there, measured, documented, updating in real time. The second instrument is the Argo Float Network. Argo is a global array of approximately 4,000 autonomous profiling floats drifting through the world's oceans, diving to 2,000 meters and rising every 10 days, measuring temperature and salinity through the water column. Argo data for the Indian Ocean and tropical Atlantic as of May 2026 shows heat content anomalies in the upper 700 meters of those basins that remain significantly above historical averages. Residual warmth from the 2023-24 event that has not dissipated into the deep ocean. This matters because the Indian Ocean and Atlantic sea surface temperatures during El Niño modulate how severe the global teleconnections are. A warm Indian Ocean amplifies El Niño's effect on African and Asian monsoon disruption. A warm Atlantic modulates the hurricane season response. The third instrument is the NOAA CPC's ENSO Forecast Model Ensemble. The ensemble of dynamical and statistical models used by NOAA's Climate Prediction Center for its official ENSO forecast currently places the probability of El Niño conditions developing by the Northern Hemisphere autumn of 2026 at approximately 55%. The probability of at least neutral conditions, meaning the La Niña buffer is fully gone, exceeds 80%. 3 instruments. The subsurface is warm and building. The surrounding ocean basins are still carrying excess heat from the last event. The models give better than even odds on a new El Niño by autumn. This is not a future concern filed under something to watch. This is the loading of the system, right now, in real time. While the consequences of the last event are still being counted, 2 claims circulate every time El Niño enters the news cycle. The first, El Niño is a natural cycle. It has nothing to do with human activity. The climate establishment uses it to push an agenda. This is the claim that contains the most truth and deploys it most dishonestly. El Niño is natural. Correct. The ENSO oscillation has been occurring for at least thousands of years, documented in ice cores, tree rings, coral records, and historical chronicles. Nobody manufactured it. Nobody controls it. But a natural cycle operating in a human-modified climate is not the same natural cycle that operated in the pre-industrial climate. The frequency of El Niño events may not have changed significantly. The intensity of the most extreme events has. The baseline on which every event operates has. The threshold at which El Niño tips coral reefs into mass bleaching has been crossed by progressively weaker events as the baseline rises. Natural mechanism, modified consequences. Both things are true simultaneously. The second claim, the consequences of El Niño are exaggerated to justify climate policy. The food shortages, the disease outbreaks, the insurance withdrawals, these would have happened anyway. This claim requires only one response. The Peruvian anchovy fishery collapse is documented in harvest records going back decades. The pattern is not statistical. Inference. It is directly measured fish catch numbers that fall by 50 to 70% during El Niño events. The global dengue record of 13 million cases in 2024 is not a model output. It is reported case counts from national health ministries. The insurance withdrawal from California and Queensland is not a projection. It is a business decision that has already been made and that homeowners are already living with. These consequences are not forecasts. They have already happened. The next El Niño is developing into a food system, an insurance market, and an ocean that are still carrying the damage from the last one. That is not exaggeration. That is the ledger. Here's the diagram the news never shows you. El Niño develops in the Pacific. Sea surface temperatures rise. Trade winds weaken. The warm water sloshes east. That event, occurring in a defined region of open ocean, thousands of kilometers from any major population center, then transmits its consequences through 5 separate systems simultaneously. The atmospheric system. Rainfall redistributes. Droughts form where there were none. Floods arrive where there was drought. The Walker circulation stalls. The marine system. Cold upwelling off Peru weakens. Anchovy populations collapse. Fish meal supply contracts. Food chain prices rise globally with an 18-month lag. The ecological system. Ocean temperatures exceed bleaching thresholds. Coral reefs bleach. Marine biodiversity collapses in the most species-rich ecosystems on the planet. The consequences spread through dependent fishing communities and coastal protection loss over years and decades. The epidemiological system. Temperature and rainfall anomalies shift vector habitats. Mosquito ranges expand to new latitudes and altitudes. Disease burden spikes in vulnerable populations. Health systems that were already stressed absorb a clustered shock. The financial system. Insurance loss ratios spike in multiple regions simultaneously. Carriers reprice or withdraw. The protection gap widens. Households and governments absorb losses that were previously socialized through insurance. 5 systems. 1 trigger. 18 months of lagged consequences spread across a world that treats each consequence as a separate, unrelated story. The fishing story runs in March. The food price story runs in September. The insurance story runs in November. The disease story runs in February. Nobody draws the line connecting them. That line is El Niño, and El Niño is building again. Stand back and hold everything together. The 2023-24 El Niño, one of the 5 strongest in the instrumental record, bleached 97% of the world's coral reefs, collapsed the Peruvian anchovy fishery to less than half its normal yield, contributed to a global dengue record of 13 million cases, produced insurance losses of $108 billion in a single year, accelerated the withdrawal of property insurers from high-risk zones across multiple continents. Those consequences are not historical. They are ongoing. Coral does not recover in 2 years. Fishing communities do not recover in 2 years. Insurance markets do not reverse their structural retreat in 2 years. The ledger from the last event is still open. And in May 2026, the TAO buoys in the Central Pacific are showing warm water building beneath the surface. The Argo floats are showing the Indian Ocean and Atlantic still carrying excess heat. The NOAA model ensemble is showing better than even odds of El Niño conditions by Northern Hemisphere autumn. The new El Niño is developing on an ocean that is warmer than the ocean that produced the last one. The baseline has moved. The threshold for coral bleaching has not moved. It does not negotiate with baselines. The coral bleaches when the water is too warm, and the water now reaches too warm with a smaller El Niño than it used to. The fishing communities off the coast of Peru have not recovered their catch levels. The processing plants that suspended operations have not all reopened. The families that lost income in 2024 are more financially exposed in 2026 than they were in 2022. The insurance companies that have already withdrawn from high-risk zones will not return because El Niño conditions ease temporarily. The protection gap does not close in a neutral year. It widens slowly during the intervals and spikes during the events. And the fish. The captain who pulled up the empty net at 4 a.m. in March 2026 is watching the sea surface temperature data on his phone. The way fishermen in his region have learned to do. The way fishermen in his region have had to learn to do. He knows what it means when the water's warm. He knows it before the news does. He knows it before the commodity markets register it. He knows it in the weight of the net. And what he knows, what the instruments confirm, what the 5 systems of transmission will prove over the next 18 months, what the ledger will eventually show in fish catch records and food price indices and hospital admission logs and insurance quarterly filings, is this. El Niño is not a weather event that happens and ends and is forgotten. It is a trigger, and triggers have consequences that outlast the pulling. The consequence of the 2023-24 trigger is still being felt in the coral, in the net, in the insurance premium, in the dengue ward. The 2026 trigger is being pulled right now, and the question is not whether the consequences will come. The question is whether anyone will connect them when they do, or whether the fishing story and the food price story and the insurance story and the disease story will run on separate days in separate sections with separate headlines, and whether the line between them will once again be the thing nobody draws.